Have you ever just, stopped to think about how you're seeing and hearing this right now? It feels so instant, right? So effortless. But behind the scenes, your brain is running this incredibly complex program to literally build your reality from the ground up. So let's dive into this amazing journey. And we're going to start with a pretty big question. Is what you see really there? You may think, of course it is. But the answer is, well, it's a lot more complicated than a simple yes. See, what you experience as reality is actually a brilliant reconstruction, an internal model of the world that's built by your brain. So that's exactly what we're going to do in this explainer. We're going to follow that journey step by step. We'll trace the path of just a single signal, say the light bouncing off a tree, all the way from the outside world until it becomes a conscious experience inside your head. It's an incredible process for sure. Okay, so first things first, we need a roadmap for this journey, a guide to what's happening and when. And it all leads to this, perception. At its core, perception is simply the conscious sensory experience of the world. It's everything you see, you hear, you taste, smell, and feel. It's the grand finale, the end product of this really long and fascinating assembly line in your mind. And that assembly line, it has 7 key stages. It all kicks off with a stimulus out there in the world. That stimulus then creates an image on your sensory receptors. From there, it gets processed by those receptors and then by your neurons before, finally, you can perceive it, recognize what it is, and then, maybe, act on it. We're going to walk through all of these. But here's where it gets really, really cool. This process isn't always a straight line, a simple one-way street. Nope. Sometimes you recognize something at the exact same moment you perceive it, and action is a total game changer. Just moving closer to something changes how you see it, and that action can create whole new things to perceive, like startling a bird and watching it take flight. So let's rewind and start at the very beginning of the process, that moment the outside world first makes contact with your body. Now, we have to get 2 terms straight right off the bat. On the left, we've got the distal stimulus. Think of that as the distant object itself, the actual tree out there on the world. But what your body actually senses is the proximal stimulus, on the right. Proximal means close, and this is the image of the tree that gets projected onto the sensory receptors right inside your eye, on your retina. So why are those 2 things different? Well, it's because of something called the principle of transformation. This basically says that the stimulus is constantly being changed as it travels. The light that reflects off that tree is altered by the atmosphere, by the time of day, and even by the shape of your own eye before it ever becomes that proximal stimulus on your retina. And this leads us to a really huge idea, the principle of representation. This is a big one. It means you never, ever actually perceive the real object out there. You only ever perceive an internal representation of it. Your reality is a model, a reconstruction, not the actual thing. Kind of wild, right? Okay, so we've got this tiny, upside-down image on our retina. Now what? How does that little picture become a rich, conscious experience? Well, it has to be translated into the only language the brain understands: electricity. And that translation process has a name: transduction. You can think of your sensory receptors as these amazing little translators. They take environmental energy, like the light from that tree or sound waves from a voice, and they convert it into electrical signals that your brain can actually work with. So where are those electrical signals headed? They're sent straight to mission control, the cerebral cortex. That's that wrinkly outer layer of your brain you always see in pictures. This is where the real magic of perception starts to unfold. What's just incredible is how specialized the brain is. Every sense has its own private destination. All your visual signals, they get routed back to the occipital lobe. Hearing goes to the temporal lobes. Touch and skin senses head to the parietal lobe. And the frontal lobe, it kind of acts like a conductor, coordinating all of them into one seamless experience. But here's the thing. The signals don't just arrive and poof, you see something. They get actively worked on. This is called neural processing. As those electrical signals travel through vast networks of neurons, they get changed. Some signals get amplified, some get quieted down, others get rerouted. Your brain is actively shaping and sculpting the raw data to create your final perception. Okay, so the signal has arrived, it's been processed, and we've officially reached step 5, perception. But there is a massive difference between just seeing something and actually knowing what that something is. Let's break that down. Perception, on the left here,
is just that moment of conscious awareness. It's the hey, I see something feeling. But recognition on the right, that's step 6. That's a cognitive step. It's when you dip into your memory and your knowledge to place that object into a meaningful category. Ah, I know that thing is a tree.
And there is no better illustration of this difference than a condition called visual form agnosia. Just listen to how a patient with this condition described a glove. They could perceive its properties perfectly, a continuous surface with 5 outpouchings, but they couldn't access the knowledge to recognize it as a glove. They could see, but they couldn't know. All of this brings us to the final step in our process, and it's a step that turns this whole thing from a straight line into a dynamic, continuous loop. And that final step is action. This is any kind of motor activity, turning your head, walking, reaching out to touch something. Action is so important because it changes your relationship to the stimulus, which in turn creates a brand new perception, starting the whole cycle all over again. We don't just passively receive reality, we are actively exploring it every second. Now, through this entire journey, from step 1 to step 7, there's been a kind of hidden director influencing almost every single stage, the knowledge that you already have stored in your head. This gives us 2 ways of processing the world that are happening all the time. On the left, you've got bottom-up processing. This is totally data-driven. It starts with the raw signals coming in from the environment. But at the exact same time, you're using top-down processing, which you see on the right. This is knowledge-driven. Your brain is using everything you already know to interpret and make sense of that incoming data. So perception is really a constant conversation between what's out there and what's already in your head. And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. If your existing knowledge actively helps create the reality you perceive, what happens to your world every time you learn something new? Does your reality itself actually change? Pretty amazing thing to think about.